This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 331, Migrating Paragraphs for the National Zoo. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about migrating paragraphs for the National Zoo with Mohammed El-Khatib. Mohammed is a web developer at the Smithsonian National Zoo. Mo's been working with Drupal since the early days of Drupal 7 and has worked on at a number of DC institutions, including Georgetown University and Capitol Hill. He currently lives in Hyattsville, Maryland with his husband, Mark, and his 22-year-old cat, Ben. Mo, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Also joining us this week and for the next 5 is Abby Bowman. She is our guest host. Abby is the web chief at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, for you acronym folks out there. Before that, she was the deputy director of digital engagement at the Commerce Department. She's been in Drupal since 2014, but started as a middle school webmaster. Awesome. I started as a computer person in high school, so we kind of have that in common. She's also an organizer of Drupal GovCon. She lives in Maryland with her husband, Mert, and 2 cats. Not 1, but 2. Abby, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Super, super excited for this.
Listeners, you may know this, but if you don't, I'm John Picozzi, and today my co-hosts are Nick Laughlin. What's going on with you?
It's a little quieter this week. My family flew home this morning, so I am a little tired. I woke up at 2:30 this morning to drive to Boston and drop them off at the airport. It's a little bittersweet. You know, it was nice to have them here for about a month, and we hadn't seen them in 3 years, so it's a good time. But it's also quieter than it's been in about a month.
I'm sorry, you woke up at 2 a.m. What time was their flight? If you woke up at 2 a.m. to bring them to the airport?
The flight was at 8 o'clock, I think. So we left the house at about 4.
Oof.
But we couldn't sleep. So we were planning on getting up around 3, getting breakfast, but we got up around 2:30. So
sometime I'll tell sometime I'll tell the listeners about my first time going to Vegas and how that worked out for me. But anyway, we can move on. Abby, what's going on with you this week?
Yeah, so similar to Nick, we had family here for the holidays, and there is that definite, everyone's gone, the house is really quiet. Oh God, back to pandemic, working from home all the time. But we did, our big exciting project was we finally got our little free library up outside. So we got like a kit where it was plain wood, and then Merit has been painting it to match our house. It turned into way more of a project than we thought it was going to be, but it's all done, sitting outside, stocked up, and people are already taking stuff. So that's exciting.
That's cool.
Abby posted pictures on social media, which we can share in the show notes, because it is very well put together and
it looks real good.
Nicely painted. Yes.
And then also been on the video game front, obsessed with Hades. I don't know if Nick, if you played that, or Mo, it is probably like the game of 2021. Highly recommended to everyone. Greek mythology themed roguelike. Super, super good.
I like roguelikes,
right.
Although I think Doom Eternal might be the game of 2021. Or was that 2020? Would have been 2020.
I'm a huge fan of isometric games like Diablo 3 and Lost Ark. So yeah, but I haven't picked up Hades yet. But you
have to. You'll be obsessed. Yeah, just block off like a month for it. Yeah.
That's what I'm worried about.
Is it like Torchlight at all, or?
Ish, yeah. Like you have different weapons that you play through run-throughs with, but you're basically like a son of Hades trying to make it out of the underworld. And so if you die, you just kind of go back to the beginning and start over. But there's different weapon types to try. Yeah. The story is amazing, and the voice acting, so it makes everybody happy.
I'm really glad the show didn't get dark, because just in the show notes it just says Hades, and
Hades.
I was kind of like, oh, talking about the afterlife. That's not gonna
just a light topic for the first show.
Not gonna work out for us, but yeah, it's all video games. Video games are good. So Mo, what's going on with you this week?
Well, I mean, not too much. I was supposed to actually be talking to you guys from the Middle East, but my travel plans fell through because PCR testing lag times have been pretty insane. And I actually, I was supposed to fly out, I think last Wednesday. And I was like sitting at home waiting for my PCR test results to come back. And it had been like 72 hours at that point. And I'm like refreshing on my phone. But I mean, it's fine. It is what it is. I guess this was like the universe telling me that to hunker down and wait a little. So I'm rescheduling for March.
Yeah, traveling is super special right now. I mean, like I said, my family flew out today.
Yeah,
we have been stressed out for a week trying to figure out all those logistics.
Which is why I was nodding my head furiously when you were talking about, your family and travel. It's insane. I think in a way I dodged a bullet, like my partner was saying. Maybe it's good that you're lying low.
Right.
But otherwise, I've on the Drupal front, I've just started working on our Drupal 9 theme. Converting our Drupal 9 theme to Tailwind, CSS, and Alpine. Tailwind 3 has been insanely fun to play around with, and so I'm happy with the direction.
Yeah, programming note for our listeners: we just scheduled a Tailwind CSS show coming up in the next couple of weeks, so be on the lookout for that.
Yeah,
I have used Tailwind, but not for Drupal. It was a Silverstripe project, and it was pretty easy to work with.
Yeah, I mean, some of the challenges, of course, involve, having to really rely on your twig and templating. But there are ways to integrate it into, your components, like your paragraph fields and your layout builder styles. You can add those classes, and which makes things much easier. I don't know. I think it's a good way of like also giving you discipline with your CSS.
Disciplined CSS is important.
Yes, absolutely.
It's difficult. It's very difficult too.
It is.
So for me this week, a interesting thing happened. I don't typically listen to the podcast, as our listeners know. I don't really love listening to myself talk, which may be surprising to some. But it happened to come on in the car as I was driving my son to school, and he was like, "Oh, let's listen to your podcast." And I was like, all right, we can listen to it. Simply because the topic was about, it was our show about the Penguin Corps and about kids using Linux in school. So we listened to it to school. We listened to it on the way back to school, and he really enjoyed it. He got a lot out of it, as far as like, oh, they're fixing computers, they're helping their community, they're doing all these great things. That's pretty cool. Asked some questions about Linux. So I think overall it was pretty awesome. I thought I would just share that great experience with the listeners. So there.
So when is he starting at Penguin Corps?
It's funny. I actually also shared the podcast with his principal and their technology director. So we'll see. You never know when that might come around. Not to go down a rabbit hole here, but they're kind of in the throes of like dealing with the pandemic and like getting to a place where like they can operate well. And their school has luckily been doing really well, but I feel like nobody needs one more thing right now, so like that could probably be a back burner item for them for a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like the advantage that Stu has is the club was already around when the pandemic hit, so they could kind of utilize it. But I feel like bootstrapping it during the pandemic might be a lot more difficult.
Yeah, totally. Let's jump into our module of the week. Nick Laughlin, tell us about it.
we have a new module of the week this week. It's draggable views. And so when I say new module of the week, it's one that we haven't talked about, but it's a very old module. It's one that I've used a bunch of times over the years. It's been around since 2008, so that must have been Drupal 6. And what it does is it allows you to create an interface for users to order views rows by dragging and dropping. So when you're editing content, if you have a bunch of paragraphs, for example, you can drag and drop and reorder them. This allows you to do the same thing with almost any view. If you have a blog and you have a client that wants to order them in a very particular way, draggable views is kind of the way to do it. It's compatible with all the currently supported versions, Drupal 7 through 9. It's pretty well. It's got a pretty big install base. I think it's got over 60,000 installs. I would say this is one of those modules you definitely want to read the README on, though, because you feel it's one of those ones where you think like, oh, I can figure it out. I'll just create the view, create the other view, and then tie them together. But it is fairly finicky, and if you don't set them up perfectly, it just won't work at all. And I will give one caveat. It does tend to have bugs. Like, for example, I have one client right now, I've spent an untold amount of time trying to figure this out. If they save content that's in a draggable view, the draggable view resets. And they have to go to the view, the administrative view, and save it again, and everything works. Like, they don't have to reorder it on the administrative view. It's in the right order there, but the actual output doesn't work, or I have to clear the cache.
This is weird. I seem to remember that issue, and I seem to remember maybe a patch for that issue, but
I've not been able to find.
I've also haven't used draggable views in a very, very long time, so that could be just misremembering.
Yeah, it's one of those modules. It's one of the only modules that does what it does, but it is one that I don't install everywhere. Because
it's funny, as
these weird cases.
As you're describing it, it kind of reminded me of like Layout Builder before there was Layout Builder, when you were like, oh, I have this whole page of things. I have to like move them around. What do I do? Oh, draggable views. Here you go.
There's draggable views or what was it? Panels.
Yeah, that's what we still have in D7. Yep.
Panels.
But I'm curious. So we've used Node Q before, and that sounds very similar, like a simpler version of this, right? But is that, when would you use one versus the other?
Panels and Node Q are like,
it's super ancient. I mean, Node Q is one of those modules that has been on projects I've worked on, but I've never set up myself. But my understanding is Node Q, you generally have to create what's in them yourself. So you would create a Node Q and say, I want these 5 modules in it in this order, and then output somewhere. Whereas the draggable views, you just have a view that says, give me all the blogs with this tag. And then you have a second view where you can see that. And then you can just say, okay, I want them in this order. And you just drag and drop.
Nice.
So I use it, for example, on a page, the client I was mentioning, they have a really unique page for thanking donors. It's a nonprofit organization, and they have a bunch of different, they call them cards, but they're promotional cards. Like, one is, some donor names. One is a link to an Instagram post by a donor. One is a logo of a corporate sponsor, and they're all different sizes, and they fit together with masonry. So they all kind of jigsaw them together. And they use draggable views to kind of bulk order them, because, if you've ever worked at a nonprofit, then different donors have to get promoted differently.
Yes.
And so the order is very, very important. So we use it for that. But yeah, it's one of those things, like I said, it does something that almost nothing else does, but you do need to test it and be prepared for a fair amount of maintenance.
All right.
Over time.
Draggable views. It's the views module of choice.
So we also have a short promotion here from Martin, aka Man Clue, talking about the Global Sprint Weekend, which is coming up in a couple of weekends.
Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Anderson Klutz from Acquia, and in the Drupal community, I go by Manclue. I'm here to talk to you about Drupal Global Contribution Weekend coming up January 28th to 30th. It's your chance to give back to the Drupal community, and you don't have to be a developer to help. You can contribute by testing patches, updating documentation, even writing issue summaries. With Drupal 10 just months away, this is your chance to help shape the next major version. And the great thing about open source is that you can scratch your own itch. So find some issues you're passionate about and help move them along. Visit the link in the show notes to find a sprint, and we'll see you there. And if you can't find one close to you, organize one. There's a link for that too.
And thank you, Martin, for that promotion. And if you are interested in the global sprint, we'll have links in the show notes.
Fabulous. Let's jump into our primary topic and learn all about the National Zoo. So let's start off with the really basic question. Bo, can you tell us a little bit about the National Zoo?
Well, we were the first Smithsonian institution.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think this was like we were the very first. I'm a little fuzzy on dates, but I think it was like the early 20th century. But yeah, we are one of the largest units out of all the Smithsonians. And we also definitely have one of the more unique digital needs. So the one thing that kind of separates us, of course, is that we don't have a static collection, and so a lot of the other museums have to rely on asset management. That is not so much an issue with us, but otherwise, yeah, I mean, we are one of the largest. Our website, nationalzoo.si.edu, is definitely one of the largest web properties.
Let me ask this one right off the top here. Which animal at the zoo is your personal favorite and why?
Oh my God, red panda, without a doubt.
Really?
They're so cute. And the cheetah's a very close second. My office is right.
Do you ever try to take the red panda home with you? Like, don't pay attention to what's in the bag.
I mean, I've tried to go into the back to with the animal keepers, and every single time I go down there, the red pandas are busy doing something. So one of these days I'll get to go in back and maybe try to pet one or feed one.
They have a packed schedule here. Okay, they're very, very busy pandas. Yes,
they are.
Did you see the new movie that's coming out called, I think it's called Turning Red Panda? It's about a girl that turns into a red panda when she gets emotional. I think I
saw an ad for that. Mm-hmm.
I'm not entirely sure.
Looks pretty cute.
Yeah, I have not. I'm looking it up right now. This looks cool.
They're also coming out with Crouching Panda, Hidden Red Panda.
Well, speaking of pandas, I want to say my favorite animal at the National Zoo is definitely the pandas, the black and white pandas. Mm-hmm. It's one of two zoos, unless it's changed, one of two zoos in America that has pandas. And I remember, I think that was my first opportunity to actually see pandas in real life when I went to the National Zoo.
Yeah,
definitely a cool experience.
Well, if you're ever down here, again, please let me know. I'll give you a tour.
I will hold you to that. Absolutely.
Sure. We'll get lost together. So I tell people I still haven't figured out the whole layout.
I do remember it being massive.
Oh,
huge.
Yeah.
Very big. So you mentioned that the National Zoo kind of has one of the bigger digital presences. Can you tell us how the National Zoo uses Drupal?
Yeah, I mean, we are fully enmeshed in the Drupal ecosystem. We are on Drupal 7, and we have the typical content types. I think we do rely a lot on moderation groups, and author groups, because we have a lot of different content managers, at the zoo, each serving its own website area. So that's pretty critical. We do work closely with our communications team on the content. Yeah, the site's been in Drupal. I mean, we moved to Drupal 7, I think, about a year before I joined. I joined in 2018. I think they launched in 2017. And yeah, now we're in the process of migrating the site to Drupal 9, hence my presentation. So.
Yes, so that leads into, why did you have the need to migrate paragraphs? Where did that come in?
So we actually, so when I came into the position, I noticed that it's like going into an archaeological dig, when you examine, because certainly when they first started scaffolding the site and building up the content, they did not account for paragraphs. Paragraphs came much later, and but they became the dominant form of content on our website, like the dominant form of content layout, and we have about 40 paragraph types, which is kind of insane. A lot of them they hook into one another, or they're nested paragraphs. So yeah, I mean, it was something that we couldn't ignore, and that's why, whether I like it or not, they're here to stay for our Drupal 9 project.
So just out of curiosity, so you had paragraphs in Drupal 7, you're migrating those paragraphs to Drupal 9. Was there any thought of switching to like layout builder in Drupal 9 as opposed to paragraphs?
Absolutely, and using blocks. I mean, so because, I mean, this is right now our migration is being handled internally, i.e. mostly me and my small team. We couldn't really, I mean, it just seemed like it was going to be a really big lift to convert them, or to create all these plugins for migrating them all into block types. And so we just felt that this was the best course of action. And we really waffled on this a long time. It was a difficult decision, but then, I mean, there are a lot of tools that continue to support the paragraph ecosystem, like Layout Paragraphs, and I think Bricks also. And so we figured, we could leverage that and maybe even still use Layout Builder as well.
Another programming note: we have a Layout Paragraphs show coming up in the next couple of weeks too. We're not paying him to make all these drop-ins, folks. I swear.
I did want to answer a couple questions for our listeners before we dive in too much more. You mentioned your team, and you mentioned a fairly large content moderation team. Can you tell us a little bit about the team around the site? How many developers are there? How many content editors are there? How big is the site?
Oh, well, okay. So, I mean, we're a very small internal team. We are basically three developers. I'm the lead, and then we just hired a junior developer, and then I have a colleague who's more of a front-end developer. So I'm doing like the full stack stuff. We have a dedicated front-end developer, and then we have our a junior developer who joined, I think, back in April. And then on the content side, we have our communications team. I primarily work with two people. Shout out to Amy and Ashley. They're phenomenal, and they do most of the content updates. And I've been actually giving them more. I've been giving them more site builder. I've been trying to get them more geared towards site building as well, like configuring views and all that stuff. So, that kind of takes the load off of me.
Yeah, that's one of those double-edged swords. I mean, giving them that freedom, frees you up to focus on more back-end stuff. But when you give communication teams access to views,
right, can go both ways.
That gives me nightmares.
Yeah,
some of the biggest projects I've worked on have the biggest question marks, or when communication teams get views. So I would just recommend, I'm sure you have this in place, but I would just recommend quarterly audits of any views that they've changed. Although one nice thing about Drupal 9, and I'm sure you've already kind of dealt with this, is you can see those changes now with like a config export. Again, double-edged sword, because if you're giving them access to change views, you have to account for that with config imports because you don't want to overwrite their stuff. It's interesting. So it sounds like it's a fairly robust team. I mean, it's on this, it's on the smaller side, but a few developers and a few content editors, you can manage a lot of complexity with that.
So going back to the actual migration from Drupal 7 paragraphs to Drupal 9 paragraphs, I'm curious, like you did mention that, this wasn't just kind of like a lift and shift. It was going to be a very directed effort and kind of like a cleanup and re-architecture effort. How did you map out your migration strategy, or what was your migration strategy to say like, okay, well, like this might not be a one-to-one, field migration. It could be something different.
So we tried to, so initially we were going to, we were not going to use the Migrate Upgrade module, which generates basically scaffolds your migration scripts or your, and basically in a nutshell ports it wholesale, your content architecture from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9. I wasn't going to do that. And we actually came up with a content matrix and everything. But then I began to realize that this might be more of a lift than actually importing the content into Drupal 9 wholesale using Migrate Upgrade and then doing the cleanup.
Mm.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I know some people are going to like wince at this, but I felt like there's a lot of, most of the stuff we need to get rid of is pretty easily, it just makes a lot of sense to do it this way.
Interesting.
Yeah. But we also did keep our content matrix. So we're going to use that on the Drupal 9 side. Again, it just comes down to resources, right now.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's interesting to me though, because I almost always tackle it from the other side. I'm always writing
Me too.
a fairly bespoke migration. So I'm curious about two things about this migration strategy. One is, how long does it take to run a migration? Because I find that sometimes when you're testing things, the fact that, if a full migration takes 10 minutes, that's one thing. If it takes 2 hours, that's another. If it takes 3 days, like your testing strategy and planning strategy is very different. How long, if you run a migration, how long does that take?
Oh boy. So it's not just about just running the migration scripts. It's also includes, the debugging, and sometimes you have to rerun migrations depending on the dependencies you set. Sometimes, I don't know, sometimes the dependencies fall through. So I found myself doing a lot of in the initial stage, and I definitely, Drupal Migrate does a really good job of getting your content in there. You still have to fine tune some things, especially, but I would say the whole process could take about 3 hours in the beginning, and then maybe after, it just includes debugging too and possibly rerunning it. In our case, it takes about 3 hours, in part because we just have a lot of media assets, and that takes the bulk of it.
So are you moving, because I imagine if you use paragraphs in Drupal 7, you were using paragraphs as pseudo media entities. Are you moving those into actual media entities?
Yep.
Or are you keeping them in paragraphs and moving them after?
We are moving all media entities as is,
Okay.
And then, but most of our media fields are in paragraphs. We do have like a slider field on some of our content types, but for the most part, most of the media is added via paragraphs. So,
and just at the big migration strategy level, how much cleanup are you doing of old paragraphs, old content, old media, or are you just kind of literally bringing every bit over?
Yeah, we're bringing it over. We are bringing every bit. Well, actually, for the most part, but what I've been okay, so for our paragraph migrations, that's where I came in. I had to create those by hand, and so what I was able to do was, if there were two paragraphs, so we had like two paragraph types that dealt with slideshows. One was called slideshow image only, and the other one was just called slideshow, which didn't make sense to me. Like this, a lot of these, like I said, paragraphs were created before I came. So I decided to merge them into one. And what I did was I just, the source was, involved these two paragraph types, and I migrated them into a new paragraph, and so that actually is, you're able to do that.
Yeah.
So, and then some fields I left out. We have like some block reference field or views reference fields that I have not set up in our Drupal, or there's no easy migration path. You have to write definitely a custom plugin, so I since there weren't too many of those, I decided just to leave them out and then recreate them later.
Yeah, no,
right.
That's fair.
Yeah.
You had mentioned Migrate Upgrade. What other tools did you find useful? When running these migrations.
So I definitely Migrate Plus offers a great set of really easy to use plugins that you can, use. And then there's Migrate Tools offers a UI for handling your migrations and also a Drush commands. So, and I use all three. I use Drush to manage the imports. We could, I can talk about that a little later. But yeah, those are the three modules that I think are crucial for any migration strategy.
I'm very familiar with Migrate Plus and Migrate Tools, but I'm not super familiar with Migrate Upgrade. It sounds to me like, when you mentioned it earlier, it sounds to me like it helps build the structure on the new site as well as create the migrations. Is that true?
Yes, it does. Basically, in a nutshell, it's also a set of plugins that specialize in moving Drupal 7 content over. So like there are plugins for creating paragraphs, paragraph types, content types, media types, and that it really abstracts a lot of that stuff for you. So you don't have to worry about, again, creating migrate rows. It's basically, but it doesn't do everything, right? I mean, as of this taping or recording, as of this recording, I don't think Migrate Upgrade handles paragraph migrations automatically, which is why, I had to come up with that strategy.
Well, what would the cover, if you had to guess or put a number to it, what kind of coverage does it provide? Does it provide you 80% of it out of the box, 90% out of the box? Not to put you on the spot, but I'm just kind of, or is it like 50%? Like, I'm just kind of curious. Is it a huge win, or is it just it made things a little bit more convenient so you used it?
So when it comes to the core stuff, I'd say most of it pretty easily. But when it comes into when it comes to migrating over things that you use via contrib modules, one being like bean block, for example. Block beans are basically fieldable blocks in Drupal 7. A lot of people use that, so
I've completely forgotten about that.
Yeah. So that was also an issue for for a lot of migrations. They used that, then they needed to migrate them. So bean block and paragraphs too, they both provide custom plugins, migrate plugins that can be used by Migrate Upgrade. So so those become, they basically hook into, or it's the Migrate Upgrade has an API that allows contrib module maintainers to create custom scripts for them. And that's what I did, of course, with paragraphs and with bean block. So that's where maybe the challenge is that a lot of the Migrate Upgrade stuff from the contrib space has to rely on the contrib maintainers creating those plugins, for the system.
I have to ask, and this is a little off topic, but the bean migration, did you migrate the beans into regular blocks in Drupal 9?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Oh yeah. I don't even know if Bean has a migration path to Drupal 9. I can't remember, but yeah, they're definitely the Bean block maintainers. They created these these plugins that allow you to do the migration. Media also, there are Media Contrib also created special a media migration module as well that plugs into Drupal upgrade. So that's where it can get a little hairy. Like you have to really do some hunting, and if you can't find it, like you have I don't know, you'll have to do it yourself, and the other big thing, views also do not get migrated over by Drupal upgrade, Migrate Upgrade, sorry. So
Okay.
but I do think there is a views migrate module, but I don't know if it hooks up into Migrate Upgrade. I have to check.
But it sounds like at least exploring Migrate Upgrade can't hurt, because you're going to do it all yourself anyway if you don't use it. So you might as well see what it generates, right? It can only help you.
Yes, exactly. And like again, it's like we're small internally right now. We're not working with any third-party vendors or agencies, which is a little bit of a bummer, of course. But so we have to weigh in our time constraints.
Well, before we move on, I guess one of the questions I have is, what is your target date for finishing this? Because Drupal 7's end of life is coming up next November. I mean,
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Oh God.
It sounds like you're well on your path, but I'm curious. I imagine your goal isn't, okay, we're going to finish October 15th. What's your target for getting onto Drupal 9?
I mean, that is our target date, but honestly, I don't think we're gonna meet it. If we want to really, I mean, things could change, but I'm being honest, we're working as fast as we can, but we've had other priorities as well that have kind of shifted me away. Not sure if you heard, the zoo recently split off with the Friends of the National Zoo, which was a nonprofit set up to support the zoo. So a lot of those processes have now been taken internally. Like we've had to create them. So I've been placed on those projects to manage. Now we have to do ticketing and parking, all of these things, and membership management. So yeah, that has kind of like derailed our schedule a little.
Yeah, those are massive undertakings.
Yes.
And we're in the middle of a 7 to 9 as well. And that was also the November ticking time bomb was also concerning me. But I recently learned we're hosted with Acquia, and they're going to be supporting it for like 4 or 5 years for their customers. So I don't know if you have kind of a similar thing figured out for if we don't make it, right, here's how we're.
Yeah, we don't. I mean, so we're actually hosted internally. We're hosted with the Smithsonian.
Oh, really?
So yeah, and I, so we've been working with our IT team. Yeah, not all Smithsonian units are actually hosted internally. Some of the wealthier units have AWS instances. But yeah, we're hosted internally. So yeah, it's really up to them on what they decide. But I think they will continue to, of course. We're going to do our best to find a way to get everybody migrated over, because we're not the only migration project that's underway.
Right.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
So going back to migrating the paragraphs, you mentioned you guys have a lot of nested paragraphs. Did you run into any issues migrating those?
Surprisingly, it was pretty straightforward. The only issue I ran into with it was when we had field collections that were fields on paragraphs being migrated over.
Boy.
So yeah, so we have on our Drupal 7 site, we have paragraphs that have field collections fields.
Who did that?
I'm not going to name names.
No, don't name it. That was a rhetorical question.
No, quite the opposite. We are going to name names.
No.
This was a long time ago, I guess.
Yeah, I said that because I could see myself doing that in the early days of paragraphs. Like, oh yeah, paragraphs, you can use that to wrap everything, and then
So
still use field collections.
yeah, I gotta ask. So did you have to write a script to migrate the field collections into paragraphs?
I didn't have to write a migration plugin because there is one already. It's called Field Collection D7 Field. There is I think in the GitHub sample GitHub that I private, and I'm like happy to provide that in the show notes actually.
Yep,
there is a plugin that the paragraphs maintainers created that allows you to convert your paragraphs, your field collections into paragraphs, and then also allows you to import your field collection entities into paragraph entities.
Okay.
The only issue comes with is the indexing. So when you're, each paragraph is structured differently. They has an ID and a revision ID. That isn't necessarily true with field collections. And so I'm still kind of figuring this out because basically when some of the field collections were migrated over, they were assigned an ID that may have been assigned to another paragraph. So think of maybe there's a paragraph that has an ID, key ID of 100. And then as field collection, is being migrated over, that could also get an ID of 100. And so it overwrites that old paragraph. So it was really interesting to see things that were not in place. So so I'm working with another developer at another unit to write to address this issue.
So it's almost like you'd want to do your base paragraph migration first and then do all your field collections afterwards, so there were no collisions with the ID.
No, that's not really, that's kind of related, but not exactly. The thing is, when you're running migration, if you're assigning the ID and not doing an entity, you probably have to do an entity lookup, which is one of the plugins that Migrate Plus provides.
Yep.
When you're running the migration, it ignores general constraints. So for example, if you assign an ID and you have, say, a blog post and an article, and you have an article with ID 4 that's already created, and then you migrate a blog with ID 4, it'll convert that bundle type. Like it will change it. And that breaks tons of stuff. But yeah, that's definitely a painful.
Yeah. What I ended up doing was not well, I mean, right now the workaround for me was just for the field collection to paragraphs is not to bring over a revision ID. Somehow that seemed to work, but I don't know how. I guess I still need to debug and figure out what's going on exactly under the hood. But I think ultimately maybe the best thing to do is to write a custom migration plugin for field collections and then check for any conflicts.
Well, you can also not to go down this rabbit hole.
Please do.
but you can when you migrate the field collections, you just don't assign the ID in the paragraph, so it will generate just a new one.
Yeah.
And then you just do a migration lookup, but you run into that problem. Then you can run into that problem that John was saying, where you have to make sure that runs last, so it's generating new IDs at the end of the list. But if it's a dependency, you can't do that. So unfortunately, what ends up happening is you end up having to not assign IDs anywhere and generate all new IDs and do entity lookups on everything, which many times when you have complex things, that's complex migrations, that's the only solution. There are two major drawbacks to that. One is you generally end up with much higher paragraph IDs. Like I've seen them end up in the millions. Especially, at least locally, when you've run it a few times, because it's generating new ones every time.
Oh yeah, that's also another problem.
The second thing that you can run into, the migration tends to be a lot slower because it has to do a lookup for every single row. So your 3-hour migration, if you're adding entity lookups for every single migration now, it might be 2 or 3 times that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that. And because we're going to talk about some of my migration hacks, that was definitely an issue I ran up with. So, when it came to rerunning migrations, they were not getting it deleted because, they have a revision ID. And so they would just keep adding paragraphs. So, that involved, SQL queries or just emptying those tables and starting fresh, and it's not complicated. If you're comfortable working, of course, with Drupal database, where to look, which I also, but yeah, that was definitely an issue. And
Before we move on, I'll just give one other piece of advice for our listeners too. A kind of dirty workaround that I've done a few times in these types of cases is I will add an additional field to whatever item is being migrated. I usually call it migration ID or whatever, and I put the original ID there. And then I do the lookup in a script separately, which it sounds like you're going to be already doing with some things.
Yeah.
But the other nice thing is you can also write a cleanup script that instead of looking in the database, you just look for things that have that a migration ID populated, and it was made from that migration, and you can just purge it. So you can have a drush script that just purges the migrated content that's not really associated with anything. And that allows you to kind of do out of order migrations. I try to avoid it where I can, but sometimes if you're doing things like if you have a dependency like that where you can't assign it, you can't do the lookup, you just migrate it later, migrate it separately, do the lookup later, and then have a cleanup process. And it's been fairly successful for me in the past.
Just to be clear, on this issue arises when we are also migrating entity types, right? Or content, with the paragraph fields. So if you delete that content, that paragraph does not get deleted because of the revision ID. It still stays in your database. So you have to also go in and delete it. So there's a lot. Yeah, it can get thorny. And so I wouldn't rely on rollback features in Migrate Upgrade. Instead, I would recommend you go into the database and delete those entries from the from the tables. So
but I mean, Migrate Tools has a rollback feature too. Is that not as reliable?
It wasn't reliable for me when it came to paragraph migrations.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Like I've seen that too, and then we can move on to the next portion. But in a similar manner, I had a migration once where I wrote a custom plugin to do something, and the custom plugin created the paragraphs because we were merging like 3 or 4 different paragraphs into one. And so the migration didn't know that it created a paragraph, so the rollback didn't do anything. But again, that's one where I just created a migration ID, so it kind of could tie it back, and then I had a cleanup process that would just go through, delete everything that has a migration ID. But yeah, it can get messy. I mean, this is part of.
Speaking of messy, thorny issues around migration, was translation a factor here? Did you guys have to worry about content translations at all?
No, actually, no, we don't. This is definitely something we definitely need to pay more attention to. But right now, we don't really have translations. We do have a Google Translate widget, but yeah, we're not factoring translations in yet.
I will share something real quick on that because our team we have a ton of Spanish content, and we were deciding between Layout Builder and Paragraphs, and that show actually was very, very helpful in kind of pushing us to a decision. But after a ton of testing, Layout Builder is still not there yet for multilingual. It is just not ready. Whereas Paragraphs, right, as a contrib module, is much more battle ready and just kind of works out of the box with multilingual. So that ended up being the deciding factor for us, in case that's helpful.
Interesting.
So you mean people actually listen to the advice that we give on the show?
Yes. We had it as homework for our team. Listen to the show and then come to our meeting and let's make a decision. So
it clearly means I'm going to have to watch what I say more judiciously.
So wait, if you're a guest host, is that your homework for the next 5 weeks for your team? Are we going to?
Right. I'm going to force everyone to watch
views?
this. Yes.
My boss is making me watch this podcast she was on.
So where did you turn for help along the way, right? As you've come into these different thorny issues, what were the best tools and resources and people that you turned to?
That's a great question. So, I mean, first I did try, Drupal.org and documentation, and I did not, aside from a couple of issue queues, there wasn't really much to go with. Definitely 31 Days of Migration. This is a amazing resource. Mauricio, yeah. I mean, he actually attended the session, and I was like, I'm not worthy, but he, I definitely used a lot of his content. We had the zoo is not the only unit at the Smithsonian working on paragraph migrations. There were a couple of other units, and so I'd been working with their developers too. So we were a lot involved, some brainstorming there. Particularly around like what's the best strategy to use. Should we just create migration plugins, custom migration plugins? And along those lines. And then the last thing, of course, is the Drupal Slack. I found a lot of good resources there, especially the migration channel. So there were a couple of threads on this issue. But it seems to be a big issue. I mean, I was surprised at how much traction paragraph migrations have taken in this space. I think it's I was surprised.
I would say personally, the most useful resource on Drupal.org is the list of plugin options for Migrate Plus and Core.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's every time I'm writing migration, I always have like, okay, what are the different arguments I can give? And that, but other than that, yeah, I feel it's very hard sometimes to find it. But yeah, Mauricio's 31 Days of Migration project is top notch.
So our team actually, because we read through the blog series, which is free, the 31 days. And then he also has a paid course where you get kind of more in-depth videos and examples to work through. So our team was working through those together, and it really leveled us up and got, because, a team of Drupal 7 folks, right? This is our first foray into Drupal 8.9, and that got us ready and made it super, super easy. Now we're like, elbow deep in migration scripts and very comfortable. Thanks, I think, in huge part to that course. So that's my plug. Got the resources. His paid content's really good too.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll also link to the episode that we had him on. I think it was like 295 or something. I'll find it and I'll put it in the show notes.
Mo, so you've gone down this path, or you're going down this path, right? Any tips or tricks for teams or people who are getting ready to go down this path, or who have already kind of adopted paragraphs for Drupal 9 and how they might want to think about setting that up?
Probably the best hack was for me was creating a view of paragraphs to kind of, because there is no out-of-the-box way to see a list of all your paragraphs. So that was really helpful, creating a view of paragraphs. And then, of course, adding to that view, fields like about what the parent entity is, or the parent field, and the rendered content. That really helped me kind of get a visual, because I'm not, I just work better, seeing that visually.
So like a report almost for
like
paragraphs.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so did you nest the paragraphs within the report to see the oh wow, okay.
So
I feel like there's a contrib module there, somebody.
That's one of the most annoying things about migrating any type of entities. And I understand why Drupal does this, but when Drupal has a reference field, it just stores the ID. So it will say something like, it'll just be like, this paragraph field, okay, the content is 3552 or something, which when you're writing the migration is utterly
not
useless.
helpful. Mm-hmm. So it's good, like, exactly, it's good to have that visual. And also when you use in views you can output a rendered a rendered version, which includes all of the nested paragraphs. So
Yep.
that also kind of helps things. It's not perfect, but it just it at least gives you an indicator to where things are going wrong, and that allows you to go in and make tweaks or rerun migrations.
Yeah, it's also really important on the after you run the migration to make sure everything gets assigned appropriately. So it's really quick smoke test to say, like, because I've certainly written migrations in the past where I did the lookup wrong, and you end up with incorrect paragraphs on the wrong nodes or things like, or nested paragraphs. You have the wrong paragraph inside a paragraph, and if you don't have that view, that's a great tip. That's definitely a great tip.
Yeah. Sorry, the other one was what you talked about earlier, which was paying attention to the database and making sure that when you're running your migrations, that everything is in place, and not to be scared about doing that.
Definitely kind of keeping tabs on things is important.
So we're not recommending running that migration for the first time on the production server, is what you're saying?
Yeah. In fact, I recommend actually creating a sandbox site. This is what I did. I created the sandbox site, and that only dealt with working on the paragraph migrations. And then when I got that down, I was able to encapsulate that in a module and then bring it over. So that's actually another tip. Use create YAML files for each one of your paragraph migrations. Use I think it's Migrate tools that allows you to do that. Or is it Migrate Plus? And then put it in a module, and it'll be self-encapsulating, and so you can focus on that.
Great tips. So you kind of mentioned the timeline that you're currently targeting sometime in October, but that there's a couple of priorities jumping up. I'm curious, what's kind of on the horizon for your team and for the National Zoo site? What are you most excited about for the coming year?
I'm definitely excited about, I think the data migration now is in audit mode, so the data is already, and now we're getting to work on kind of the fun stuff, which is more of the front end stuff. I have to be a jack of all trades. So though mostly what I've been doing is scaffolding our theme, and now working with our front end guy on building it out. But yeah, I'm very excited about using moving away from Bootstrap 3 to something like Tailwind and also Alpine JS. I'm excited about some of the new design elements that we're thinking up. We're pretty much going to stick with the same branding and style guide, but we are going to make a few tweaks to it. So
question, is there any, like, in the future, maybe next year, the year after, any thoughts of converting from paragraphs to layout builder? Or are you guys like, we're good with paragraphs, we're just gonna rock with this for the foreseeable future?
That's a good question. I mean, I would like to keep things more in core. I don't see paragraphs going away anytime soon, only because of layout paragraphs. I mean, that module kind of makes things, it's a good stopgap between a tool like Layout Builder, and paragraphs in the edit screen. However, I think also there is some functionality that paragraphs brings to the table that Layout Builder kind of still struggles with.
I don't see paragraphs going away, even if layout paragraphs didn't exist. I mean, it's just like having fieldable entities that you can attach to content.
Exactly.
Is just something that you need. I mean, I think my wish list for paragraphs would just to finally understand why the entity revisions module exists, because I feel like I've never wanted revisions on paragraphs and it causes so much pain. But I'm sure there's a good reason for it. The people that work on paragraphs are far more capable than I am. But it is one of those things that's kind of my wish list. But yeah, I mean, paragraphs I think is here to stay. It's one of the core. I mean, the only reason why field collections was replaced was because field collections was before the full field API was like fleshed out in Drupal 7. And paragraphs is basically field collections, but with fieldable entities.
Yeah, I think also specifically in our use case, because we have so many paragraphs, paragraph types, it would just be, it might be just laborious for us to do that. If we had more staff, if we had more capacity, definitely that would have been a consideration.
Yeah.
So that's also what we have to factor in, the reality of the situation.
I honestly don't think that that's a compromise. I mean, if you listen to our layout show, I go in a little bit more detail there. But when Layout Builder first came out, I thought that would be a compromise. Like sites should be moving to Layout Builder. I no longer feel that. I think it's perfectly valid to just stay on paragraphs and use them. Now, maybe you clean them up a bit and you take some of the layout piece out of paragraphs, but I think paragraphs is a valid choice. You shouldn't feel bad about sticking with that. Compromise.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I do think there are resources out there for managing that migration. So it's not it's definitely possible and doable. And I'll be happy to provide sources to those two in the show notes.
And I know, so Mo was actually a speaker at GovCon last year. And so I think we can probably include the link to his session there, because I know you went into a kind of more technical detail and showed, shared your screen and showed code examples. So definitely kind of, I think we'll include a link there. But is there anything else that you wanted to cover or highlight here with us?
No, that I'm just, no, not really. I'm just really happy that, you guys have been putting a lens on this. I really hope that we can get more tools from the community, more attention paid to streamlining this migration more, so thanks.
Awesome. Mo, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, pleasure was mine. I'm a huge fan of the show, so I'll continue listening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For our listeners, do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or via email at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel. If you're interested in show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and Chad's Book Corner, you can sign up for a newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
You can promote your Drupal camp on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/camp promo.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing Become a Patron.
We have reached the end of our show for today. Thank you to all of our guests and guest hosts. Let's go through it. If folks wanted to get a hold of you, Mo, how would they go about doing that? What's the best way?
Best way is via the Drupal Slack. You can find me at Mohammed El-Khatib, that's probably the best way.
Can find you weekends in the red panda enclosure.
That too, yeah. Come by the zoo.
You go.
Ask for Mo. They'll know.
You go. Awesome. Abby, where can folks find you?
Same. Drupal Slack is a great place to find me. I'm A Bowman, Bowman.
Awesome. Nick Laughlin, what about you?
You can find me online pretty much everywhere, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Have a good one.
Bye.